Right, so just past 3 o'clock. Don't forget that your suggestions in terms of the country you'd like us to focus on in that focus on whichever on which we'll do every week around 2:45 thereabouts, maybe 2:30 to 2:45 on the Wednesday. Just email me on that one there, and then of course for the spotlight as well. Who would you like me to put in the spotlight? I've read through a few more emails. I need to respond to those, and we'll try and do that soon. I did mention before I had a chat with the public protector, Julie Madden, said a couple of weeks just before the end of the year, and said, okay, we need to get her down in the studio. Couldn't get her in December, January, maybe understandably so, but spoke to her last night at the Public Excellence Awards, and she said, fine, I need to sort of get her into the studio pretty soon. So your suggestions as well, I certainly would appreciate it. If you just tuned in, my name is Ashraf Garda. This is the afternoon talk show, and certainly after 3 o'clock, from 3 to 4:45, before we get to Radio Vuka, it's all about putting somebody in the spotlight. Today it's rather different. We've had quite a few politicians in the last couple of weeks, and a footballer yesterday, Mark Smopignani. Today it's the turn of John. Is it John or Jonathan?
John.
So Jon Foster, which is a strange name for South Africans because they have a political affiliation to Jon Foster with a V, Jon Foster-Pedley. But he's not a politician. He's the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School Africa, part, of course, of the University of Reading as well, which is based in the UK. So, Jon Foster-Pedley, thanks for joining us and allowing us to put you in the spotlight.
Thanks, Ashraf, and I really appreciate you debranding me from Jon Foster.
Does that happen? I mean, I know it's very English on your side, but, I mean, do you find people sort of connect the names?
I've never really had it, but it's very interesting. It's such a difficult affiliation in a name. Of course, I'm spelled totally different. Why we have double-barreled names in Britain is very interesting. Is because you had a poorer man marrying a richer woman, and the trade-off, because we don't have Lobola, the trade-off was that you had a double-barreled name and you kept a woman's name there. So in my history,
so that would be
Irish Fosters,
right?
Yeah, married a poorer Pedley. So there you are.
So the double-barrel would happen if what? If the woman is richer?
Yeah, that's right.
But if the woman was poorer, then it would be single.
Yeah, I'm coming with my money, but at least let me keep my name in the family. And so then you could do it.
How prevalent is that in the UK?
I think it's dying out. You know why that became a double-barreled name, I think, was because my grandfather was one of the pioneer motorists in Britain. In fact, in 1906, he wrote a book on motor car mechanics, and he was in contact with the Wright brothers and all that. And he had a lot of lordly friends, and I think partly to allow himself to be better connected with them, he assumed the double-barreled name because he was well known at the time, and I think that greased the wheel socially for him.
Well, it's got a nice ring to it. I think double-barrel names. I mean, although they may be a bit awkward to spell and to read out, they certainly have a nice ring. Okay, there you are. If you want to call, 08911042007. I'm not sure how many friends and family members of Jon Foster-Pedley will call in, but maybe they're all based in the UK. I'm not too sure. But anyway, if you have at any stage interacted with my guest and you want to say hi to him, that's absolutely fantastic. If you've been, at the business school as well, and you want to just reflect on the business school, that's also fantastic. If you just want to ask some questions about business, since we are talking to Jon Foster-Pedley from the Dean of the Henley Business School, that's also fantastic. And I think it's a very important time now as we talk again about growth, and you had Jane Naidoo speak earlier about poverty and means of eradicating poverty and the importance of education in doing just that. So all those things, if you want to call in any time, we'll take your calls, and 08911042007, the SMS which costs £2, 3471. If you are tweeting about what we're talking about now, just follow me first on Twitter, Ashraf Garda 1, and if you are tweeting, use the hashtag in the spotlight. In the spotlight, I certainly would appreciate it. And as per usual, I'll pick out some comments on Facebook as well. Okay, so let's then talk about what's a Brit doing in South Africa.
Very interesting. I was a student in the late 60s, early 70s, and there were a lot of South Africans escaping, I suppose, from what they didn't like in South Africa at the time. And so I mixed with them in those times, and I really enjoyed them. They were across the races, and they just had an attitude about them which was can-do, and also they couldn't be placed in the English kind of social milieu because they didn't know what they shouldn't do. So they just did everything, which was extremely refreshing. So they invented stuff, they crossed all the barriers, and I was extremely stimulated by that. And so later on in my career, when I became a pilot, funnily enough, in the 80s, I came back and I worked for airlines here, and I worked for geophysical survey in Africa, and then for 5 years in the 80s. And then later, after I'd been back in Europe and working in Africa for some time, I came back 16 years ago to work at UCT, the Graduate School of Business, teaching strategy there and designing and running the executive MBA. And then about a year and a half ago, I joined Henley as Dean. So I'm kind of detribalized, and I've also married to South African with a very young South African family. So I'm a detribalized Brit with a South African family.
So where's
thoroughly enjoying it.
Is this home now or the UK?
It is home. It's very interesting. It's funny enough, I'm still a permanent resident, even though I've been here for so many times. And I was mulling over the other day why that was so, why I hadn't yet taken citizenship. And it came to me in a flash that I hadn't fully identified in something about South Africa. The old South Africa I couldn't relate to. And what did it for me when I was thinking about the Australians, the idea of new Australians, and I'm passionate about the development of South Africa, and particularly about the development of all peoples and equal access. And I thought, well, I'm a new South African. I'm a new South African. We work together to make this new South Africa, which is a multinational, capable, equal, enabling South Africa. And now, for me, that's the South Africa I'm fully part of. So I definitely feel South Africa's home for me. And of course I feel Britain's home to me because I was brought out wandering through the woods, looking at the nature, and I got some deep ties there. But I'm pretty detribalized now, and I'm fully South African.
When you were in the UK and you made the point about being influenced by the South Africans, obviously enough, did they, in fact, then convince you to come to this country? I mean, by actions or by actual words?
I think just by actions and example, I think I was deeply impressed just by the authenticity of them and the energy and the openness of mind and somehow the courage of Africans and South Africans at that time. And it just went very deep. And so when I became a commercial pilot later, I had the opportunity to go anywhere in the world, and I sent CVs around the world. I had some offers to come to South Africa. I said, fantastic. So I came, and for me, as a young pilot in those days, I remember my early charter flights, I was flying lower than I should have done. I remember pulling up for a giraffe. I said, now I'm in Africa.
Really? So when did you then live in this country for the first
1980 to 1985. I lived there in the old dispensation, which was startling for me. And then later I worked in West Africa. And I think what happened to me when I worked in West Africa, for the first time I really made friends of Africans, but I hadn't done before in South Africa in the 80s. And I really came to me how sheltered I had been in those times in South Africa, with a sense of deep regret in some ways. And it worked for me a real passionate drive to change. And later on I did an MBA and switched careers to academia, and that left with me a huge belief in what South Africa is capable of, what South Africans are capable of, and what we should do together to build, education and build potential for South Africans here, and what we can do in this country, which I believe is a lot.
All right. And then when you then came to South Africa, you made the point, 1985, so in the middle of it's still apartheid South Africa at that stage, but also a country in the throes of major tumult and ultimately revolution. Yeah. How did you feel about it, living in a country where, because you're British, you would sort of be first class, as you're well aware of, and the majority would not be?
It's very interesting, because I came from, I was thinking about this on the way here, about my background, and I come from a middle-class background in Britain, which is marginally privileged, but compared with the rest of the world, I came from a hugely privileged background, middle-class Britain. And when I came to South Africa in the 80s, between 1980 and 85, of course, I was really just buried in flying, and I was just flying and living in the bush and doing what I did, and just living in that world, and had very, very little connection. Flying was pretty much everything for me then. And very little engagement with the social, what was going on in South Africa. And to the extent I wasn't fully conscientized, really, about what was happening. And it wasn't until later, and I'd left, that all started happening for me with a vengeance when I was working elsewhere in Africa. So yeah, living in South Africa in those days, it was nature, it was a bush, it was all that side of Africa. Living in South Africa now in the last 16 years has been completely different to me. And it's really interesting, from being a sort of knee-jerk conservative son of a military officer, I'm now sort of I was listening to Pravin Gordhan the other day, and deeply relating to everything he was talking about, deeply relating to his passion for change, to Mampela Rampelli. These are the people who are in a sense, and Trevor Manuel.
The people that you would admire.
Yeah, people are really trying to make change happen and constructive change in the country.
All right, I don't want to dwell on this one, but I'll just stick with us for one last time. When you then were in this country, I mean, the disparities based on race, the discrimination based on race, you must have been aware of it at the time that you arrived. And how did you feel about it personally? Because the question would be, why would you even come to this country in the first place, you know?
I came to the country for several reasons. I think one of them was that, to me, I'd met these young South Africans, and I really had to see it for myself. Second was I wanted to feel the sense of Africa, and I've often thought that, you know, for somebody like me, coming to Africa is like discovering frozen parts of yourself that somehow has been frozen out. And it was just that vitality. It was a kind of visceral attraction. And then there was the kind of shock and horror of seeing the poverty and the disparity and living across those boundaries. And I think that tension, that dissonance, the psychological discomfort that created was incredibly fruitful, in a sense of, it's like the grit in the pearl that makes the oyster. It just ground away at me. The grit in the oyster that makes the pearl. It just ground away until that understanding emerged. And it was a difficult time from that respect. It was a difficult time to see that. And there was a sense of, shame and guilt for being white and for being privileged, and a growing understanding of the effect of colonialism and what I'd done across the world. Also pride in my own roots and pride in my family. So you can see there was that mixture. And it was interesting to be able to come back here when things changed and to throw myself fully into trying to be part of the solution, the construction, to do something for South Africa and create opportunity for all South Africans. And in a sense, to help South Africans really believe in what they're capable of. I think one of the difficult effects of those times was it undermines people's confidence in a way that's awfully hard to talk about. You know, an abusive relationship for 50 years, what does that do? I think in education now, one of the first things we have to do is to really work with people, to help people really believe in themselves and their confidence, that our brains are phenomenal, and we can do so much more. We really can.
Well, maybe after chatting to you, you'll be convincing me to go and study. 08911042007. Professor Jon Foster-Pedley is the man in the spotlight, the Dean, as well as Director at the Henley Business School, Africa. Just your thoughts. I'll pick out a couple of the questions. Let's just see if I can pick out a couple. In fact, I'll do that in a moment or so. But 08911042007, and I'll check out some of the comments on Facebook and Twitter in a moment as well. Let's then talk about the work you do right now, because we'll go back to your to your switch from flying and to academia later on, but in terms of what you do right now?
For the last 16 years or so, or a bit longer, I've been working in academia. After I did my MBA, they say you want to teach what you most need to learn. I thought, well, I better teach strategy. I'm fascinated by it, and I need to learn a lot about it. So I started teaching.
Because you knew nothing about it, so you teach
Absolutely.
strategy. Okay, got that.
Well, I knew a bit, but it was the most fascinating area. So I started to teach it, and then lived in France, and I came here. And then I found a passion. I found a passion for helping people learn and to helping people think for themselves, and also to help people deal with complexity. So the world of strategy is one that people often think of the world of clinical planning. It's so far from that. It's working with increasing levels of complexity. How do you make decisions when you're faced with uncertainty? So senior managers and senior directors are not living in a world of certainty at all. They're living in the opposite. So what can we do to help people deal with that, see things systemically, and to develop the confidence to do actions in the face of great uncertainty that require courage and analysis? Because it doesn't matter how much analysis you do, you're never sure. I mean, every strategy is a guess, is a hypothesis, an experiment, and you never really know until you.
Do you think that that's underplayed, the need to develop strategic thinking in every aspect of your life?
I think it is, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what strategy means. It's one of those suitcase words. You open it and it comes out with 1,000 meanings. You know, but for me,
what does it mean for you?
Yeah, for me, strategy means very much about your capability to think rationally about things, but also your ability to think at the same time flexibly and creatively. So if you're going to be strategic in your thinking, the first thing you have to be able to do is deal with a system, not see one part of it. Nearly everything we do is interrelated. I mean, if we deal with if you and I deal with a situation with a Facebook store, you've got an experience that you will know a lot about that aspect. Like, you will see it in a way different from me. I will see it in another way. Neither your nor my perspective is fully correct. But if you and I can communicate and talk and share those insights, we get a richer understanding of that. So a lot about strategy is getting people who are very smart to talk together and think well together.
Okay.
And then come up with your best guess hypothesis and put it in action.
Is that the big problem? I mean, in world terms, you can't put the late Muammar Gaddafi, Hosni Mubarak, Robert Mugabe, you can't put them in the same room and say jointly lead. That's what you're saying. That's difficult.
Well, how could you? I mean, we develop it. We see the world as we are, not as it is. So, those people develop a particular worldview and they become more and more articulate about it and probably more and more inflexible. So it's very hard to say to that person, we've got to change our views on this. In fact, as we go forward into increasingly difficult problems in the world, and I think about my children, what they have to deal with, we've got to learn to think and talk together in a way that we haven't done before. It's not about who's the great leader, which is the one brain that knows best. It's about harnessing our collective insights and having dialogue, having conversation that progressively helps us solve problems to which we've got no answers yet.
And I mean, you do agree that the ability to be strategic and creative in your thinking is critically important to the success of, your family, your community, and the country we live in.
Hugely. And you mentioned community, and community is probably at the root of nearly everything to do with what we want to do in society. When we look at a business school, for example, and you feel say, business, you're just out to sell MBAs, aren't you? No, we're not out to sell MBAs. In fact, take enormously little enormous little interest in what the other business schools are doing competitively. What we're interested to do is doing good work. A good business school should make a difference to people. You come and study at a good business school, you should be able to do something better. You should be able to manage money better, see opportunity better, be more entrepreneurial, be more analytic, have a deeper understanding. You should go and do stuff. South Africa doesn't need a raft of theorists and model makers. South Africa needs brave doers who will talk and listen to each other and engage. So good business schools help you do that better. If you do that better, you're probably creating better value for other people. If you do create better value, you get more money coming in, people come to your company. Then you can use that money to educate your children, to build the communities. So what a good business school does in the end is aid in development. It aids in growth and creating a better life. It's not about selling MBAs. And any education institution that gets lost on the way, I think it's about what course I do or how am I competing, has just missed the plot. We're here to make a difference. That's the plot of education. That's what we should do. And that's just a fantastic world to be in.
It's not about selling MBAs. You agree with that? All right. You want to call it about MBAs and the value of that, and maybe just education in terms of business management specifically. And you certainly can put questions and to my guest, Professor Jon Foster-Pedley. I'm fine with that. If you want to just listen to us talking and chatting away, that's absolutely great as well. 0891 104 207. Professor Jon Foster-Pedley is the Dean at the Henley Business School Africa, and he's in the spotlight up to around 3:45. Okay, so in terms of the values of MBAs, let's just talk about that. Very topical all over around the country of people who are highly educated who then oversee some of the biggest financial disasters and company disasters in the world, starting in the USA, and then conversely or paradoxically you get others where people who have not studied whatsoever are able to steer the ship into fantastic waters, to uncharted waters, to great success. Your thoughts on those things?
Well, Ashraf, you really put your finger on it. We confuse education with intelligence, almost systemically. With some, especially probably in South Africa, where we had a privileged elite having education and a majority not, and somehow some nonsense emerging that you have to be educated into. It's not true. Education and intelligence are two different things. In an equal society,
so explain what's the difference.
Well, education means you've had access to education. You might have been through something. From flying days, when you're a pilot, you say that's a 5,000-hour pilot. You say, and it's only a 1,000-hour pilot
because he's been through more in terms of.
Well, you think he's done 5,000 hours? He must have. But wait a minute, you might have done 5,000 of the same hours, and that 1,000 hours is just all mixed up and diverse. So that 1,000-hour pilot's got a much richer experience. So you might have people just with access to opportunity just going through an education system, not ever thinking, not turning their brains on ever. And then you have other people who haven't had that access to education opportunity who are extremely bright. So the one thing that's incredibly important for me to understand, and what I've seen reinforced time and time again, is that here in South Africa, we are blessed with extremely intelligent people across the board. And what you're starting to see happen more and more now is people coming from every background, often through hard times, succeeding extremely well in education context. So what we need to do probably is find ways to make education access open to more people. And so you talk about an MBA, and people think an MBA is an elite qualification. And of course, there's a self-serving advantage in that, because if you have an elite qualification, you're one of an elite, and you're going to be somebody who's going to get the best jobs. But wait a minute, isn't an MBA something that's supposed to help you learn things? And if what you learn is useful, then why harness it to an elite? Surely that should be open to everybody. So if an MBA is a good qualification, is a good process of learning, then more and more people should do it. And it shouldn't be seen as elite. It should be as a building blocks for managerial and leadership capability.
You see, as I'm listening to you, and I'll get to one or two of the calls in just a second, as I listen to you, I almost hear the argument to say, please be intelligent, but don't put too much emphasis on being educated.
No, that's not what I say.
I know that's not what you said, but I can understand someone interpreting that.
Do not feel that just because you haven't been through an education, you're not intelligent. Far from it. Our education system in the past, and many have often privileged people who've had opportunity for education. So we have extremely intelligent people here. And the education system that we provide needs to give open access to all those people. So my point here is that if we make education access wide, if we give excellent education to more and more people, then it's going to lift the country. The other thing is that far from not valuing education, I think that what we need is very similar to what happened in Singapore and in Germany and Japan and other places. We need to have a passion for education. As a parent, I need to put aside some of my needs for my children's needs to allow them to be fully educated, to allow them to get, and also we need to challenge the educational system and the educational institutions to force them to modernize, to think better, to think more creative.
Hold that thought, because I think we're going to talk more about it, especially when I get to some of the callers. Ashante from Durban, you probably need to put the headphones on to listen to her. Now, she's a regular caller, and I can tell you now, I'm not too sure how educated you are, but you certainly are intelligent, so we expect you to ask some interesting questions. Hi, Ashante.
Hey, Ashraf. I am educated and I am intelligent, but I've also felt that, we need a good mix. We need a mix between the education of the colleges and universities of the world, but we need an African education. So I'm also an Africologist, logical study of Africa for Africa. Anyway, I wanted to greet your guest in the room. And one of the things that I was actually getting a little bit worked up under the collar, because I thought, listen to this white man from England who claims Africa with such sincerity, his commitment to South Africa, his commitment and the ease in which he claims it. And I think about the thousands of other people who would like to be given the space and time to also claim Africa without feeling like they can't say that, I really love South Africa, it's home, and I think he knows what I'm saying. But what I also was inspired by him speaking about is the balanced way in which he appreciates and understands that Africa of West Africa and the Africa of South Africa. Because that's also another thing, Ashraf, that, people enter South Africa and leave here feeling alone. But you can go to Lagos for a minute and right away you have somebody that belongs to you. And I think there's something there, and he might want to talk about that. But thank you for what you're bringing across, and I hope that, Ashraf, that we can have more Africans, South Africans, who might not have the degree, but might have the degree of experience that can walk into a place like his institution and be supported to get a degree or to get a master's. Because I've met some amazingly intelligent people, Ashraf, who are doing amazing work, but because they don't have the paper, they can't get an opening.
Okay. I think you raised a very important one. They've sort of skipped huge chunks of formal education, but they're clearly intelligent, Ashanti. So what, in fact, do about them if now they have serious aspirations and the intelligence suggests they want to get even higher? We'll get to that question in a moment.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Indeed, thanks for your call. Appreciate it. More calls, most welcome. 0891 104 207 3:30. Time for the news headlines
on SAFM.
Right, thanks for that, Rob. And of course, you can track Rob as he tracks the traffic all throughout the drive home on PM Live and beyond that. SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. By the way, you can join the SAFM Radio Facebook page, not just mine. Join that page because lots of pictures, including, by the way, the picture that we've just taken between myself and with Jon Foster-Pedley, will be stuck onto that page. Probably around now, I think. So if you want to see what they look like sort of chatting to each other, then that's the way to go. Right, and you can do the same, of course, on the Twitter page as well. Right, let's move on. Jon Foster-Pedley is my guest, continues to be my guest. He's the Dean of the Henley Business School Africa. So we're talking education, we're talking about where Africa goes, we're talking about his journey as well, and I'll still take maybe time for 2 more calls maximum, so if you want to do so right away, I suggest you dial up now, 0891 104 207. There's a question saying, and I want you to answer the question from Ashante, but by the way, let me answer this together. Why does your guest feel that South Africans are... Now, I need to sort of, because it's sort of hit and miss in terms of the way it's been SMS, feel that South Africans are go out and do people. We are known for our capacity to turn our hands to things. Would love to hear his opinions. I'm not sure that's very clear. Why does your guest feel that South Africans are, in fact, go out and do people? Why are we known for our capacity to turn our hands to things? Would love to hear his opinion from W. Okay. So, in fact, basically saying that you believe that South Africans are doers. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think we are. I mean, I think the history of South Africa is that, I mean, you could write books forever and make films on what's life lessons from South Africa. But the fact that we've gone so far, we've made, and those brave people made such transitions in the early stage, shows that there are people who will sit on the fence, and there's hard decisions to be made as optimization, compromise is done for the better good. So I think that requires a certain courage, and I think action requires courage. South Africa and probably the whole world in many respects needs people to be just simply better at doing basic things. So if you go to a business school, you can learn a series of models, but so what? If you go to a business school and you're doing a sort of action learning program where you're applying your learning to something while you're doing it, now you're testing your knowledge, you're thinking, you're reflecting on it. If you apply it in a real context, that takes guts. Because go back to what I said before, you never know when a strategy or plan of action...
Whether you're in fact correct.
There's always an experiment. So as long as you understand that, you're putting yourself on the line every time you act. And the question there is how well can you learn and monitor what you're doing while you're acting? If you're unconscious, if you're asleep while you're doing things, you'll go drifting off like a supertanker into the distance. If you're awake, you'll be catching mistakes early. Like flying. People think pilots don't make mistakes. Sorry.
I don't want to be with you when you make your mistakes, depending on what... Well, obviously you make lots of small mistakes. Right.
But the whole thing about aviation safety is you catch mistakes very, very early. Right. And that's the whole thing about it. Medical safety is should be about life too. You don't want to be asleep. So education is as much about waking people up and waking ourselves up and being conscious. And remember what Jung said, consciousness is conflict. So you're going to live in conflict when that happens. It's not a cozy place to be.
So what are your thoughts then about people who believe that South Africa and sort of move from education as we know it to OBE back to whatever it was before OBE and the sort of emphasis still to a large degree on rote learning? I mean, your thoughts on education at high school and primary school in terms of preparing people to think laterally and strategically?
Well, like I just told you, I've got 2 very young children. I'm an ex-starter dad. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And I think that the education system in South Africa is one that is emerging rapidly. The history behind it is so difficult, makes it so difficult to manage. But I think what we are doing is, as I said before, starting to be more and more conscious about what's happening. We have awake people in the system, and while we read the stories of what's going wrong and we read the stories about lowering standards, etc., there are many, many stories of things going right. And typically you'll see the wrong things. You'll read the stories about the wrong things because they're the results of things that have happened way ago. Something started 5 years ago and you see the bad result. What's happening now is A lot of good things are starting to be put in place. I hope you'll start to see the results in 4 or 5 years' time. I believe in the South African education system throughout whatever we do. Firstly, we've got to help people develop confidence in themselves. All of us need to understand that we have great capability, much more than we think. And we need to be disciplined in training that. And not just analytically, because analysis is easy to do. Gathering knowledge is easy to do. It's making sense of things. It's interpretation. It's making decisions that's difficult. It's acting and understanding what you do at the same time. So,
do you think, I mean, yesterday, sorry to interject, Brigadier Bam, who used to be the head of the IEC, I mean, she got this Lifetime Achiever Award again at the Public Excellence Awards, right? But she made the point that there are many institutions, South African institutions, that are absolutely world-class, and there's no apology for that. And we can go through business schools, we can go through what she's done with the IEC, we can go through our negotiated settlement, we can go through sport, World Cups, cricket, soccer, the third Cameroon cricket, that sort of thing. But the question really is, do you think South Africans believe that? Do you think as a grouping we fully understand that actually we really have the capacity to be one of the leading nations of the world? Well, as opposed to a challenger nation.
We do have the capacity to be one of the leading nations, but being a leading nation is not a solitary act. It's a relational act. We talk about business competition all the time, or kind of national competition. Actually, most of it's about collaboration, understanding, working with people. Same as business schools and what we learn. We need to understand about collaboration. So, why do we often see the worst of things? I suppose because those things are around us. They're real. And it's the moment you say, I'm not looking at those, you think, well, he's Pollyanna-ish, or she's living in a dream world and not seeing what's there. It requires great courage to be optimistic. Corruption, if you look at corruption, to my mind, that's based in a lack of significance, as Mampela Rampela would say, a lack of self-worth. If you think you can't do it, you're going to corrupt. And corruption steals from our children's future. That's what it does. It's not a victimless crime. It creates lack of opportunity for entrepreneurs. It means that if you're good at something, if you're the best, you're not going to get the opportunity you deserve. So if you're an entrepreneur and you face a corrupt situation, it means you can't grow your business in that, which takes away from young South African children that want to grow. That's based on a negative lack of self-awareness, lack of self-confidence, lack of self-importance. Education, on the other hand, is an act of optimism. What it says is, I'll educate myself, not to get the certificate, but because I'm worth it, because I can, because I have this capability to grow and learn in a way all my life. So education is, in a sense, the counterbalance to corruption. And what we need to do everywhere is have people of all parts of this country is to believe deeply in educating themselves, not for the certificates, not for the qualifications, but because of who I am and who I can be. And that's one of the things we'll turn around.
Self-motivation there. Jon Foster-Pedley is my guest. He's the man in the spotlight. Maybe another 5 minutes or so. There's some SMSs that are very similar to what was asked before, so I won't go through them, excepting maybe the one that Ashanti spoke about, and maybe we need to get it answered. So how then do we bridge that gap between people who in effect have not really studied, but the intelligence suggests otherwise? They're highly intelligent people, but they will now want to move on to another level. In fact, let's call it, they want to sort of play in the Champions League of business, having missed the Premier League.
Well, the first thing is...
What can one do about it?
Well, the first thing is to turn up in his head and say, wait a minute, what are the ways of educating we should do? If we're intelligent human beings and intelligent educators, how do we construct education processes that help people who might not have got some of the traditional building blocks of education? And also, actually, come to think of it, maybe some of those traditional education models are a bit outdated anyway. Let's start inventing. So let's be intelligent about education. So how do you do it? Well, let's get the educators thinking better. There's plenty of models out there. There's action learning models. I was reading about the Barefoot College in India, looking on TED Talks last night. Fantastic stories of inventive educators. We need those educators in South Africa. And interestingly enough, beyond the rhetoric, I think that the Council on Higher Education, I think the universities, I think the FETs, the whole, the high schools, everything. I think people know that. So we need to invent new ways of education and be courageous and brave about that. The other thing we need to do is continually work with people who are in action, who are doing things. We don't have the luxury always to stop our studies to work, to stop our work to study. We have to do it all at the same time. So let's use education methods which exist and experiment until we fine-tune an innovative, better way of educating in this country.
But I mean, should there be an outreach program? I mean, Sipho Hostek-Mabuse, one of the leading singers in the country, made the point of he wants to finish his matric now. Now, my logic is, having interviewed him, he doesn't need that piece of paper to prove anything. Highly, highly intelligent man. I would suggest he should have been spoken to before to say, leave that alone. We will allow you to jump ahead because you've actually just done so much better anyway.
Well, interesting on MBAs, what happens now is that you're supposed to go, to do an MBA, you should have an honours degree and 3 years experience. Except if you haven't got the honours degree and got a different degree, you have more experience. And in some cases, if you don't have a qualification at all, but you've got significant management experience, do an MBA. Remember, it's not the MBA, it's not the badge that matters, it's what you're learning. Because you are the person at the heart of that. It's not the institution, it's not the certificate. What are you doing for yourself? So I completely agree. We really should be having an outreach.
Okay, couple of quick questions. What for you personally has been the tipping point in your life, for your life?
Several. I think doing my MBA was very interesting because it allowed me a year of reflection, or a couple of years of reflection. I think being in South Africa in the 80s was a hugely seminal moment for me. I think more recently, getting married again, having a family later, completely transformed my life and has made me feel dedicated to family and community in a way that I never was before. And because when you're active in schools, you're working with all South Africans,
yes,
we are sharing an endeavour here. We are sharing an endeavour.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, what about, is there a book that you'd recommend someone to read, a must-read book?
Well, I've always liked Dan Pink's A Whole New Mind, because it breaks the myth of, left brain, right brain.
Okay.
And
people are going to ask about it. So Dan Wing, right?
Dan Pink.
Pink, sorry. P-I-N-G, like Jon Pink, very, very common name. A Whole New Mind. Okay, got that?
For those with a more reflective mindset, one of my Indian friends, Priyal, kindly opened up the idea of the autobiography of a yogi to me, so I'm reading that. Apparently it was Steve Jobs' only book on his Kindle.
Really?
So I'm reading that as well, and that's actually very interesting.
Who's your mentor now? Do you have a mentor?
I don't have a specific mentor. It's very interesting. I come across a number of people who mean a lot to me. Mampela Rampelli, every time I hear her speak, she's fascinating and inspiring. And in a weird way, what happens to me is I'm in the classroom, I'm teaching people, and I see somebody who's drawn themselves up from walking 15 miles to school, studying under a lamp, and working their way into the same room as a lot of privileged kids in there, and nothing wrong with people's backgrounds, just how it is. And I watch what they've achieved. Those people inspire me. Taddy Bletcher, what he's done with Cedar.
Yeah, amazing
those
stuff.
sort of things. A number of people like that.
What would you like to get off your chest in 30 seconds?
In 30 seconds, I say that we need to buy into education, a modernized education in South Africa, in a way that we cannot even begin to understand. If we want to make this country work, then believe in it, and believe in yourself that you really can do these things. Education isn't for an elite, it's for everybody, and it's absolutely essential. And for the educationists, then let's get innovative about what we do.
All right. Lastly, is there a phrase or a quote that you use ever so often that you'd like to share with us?
I think just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
He's a Nike man. Just do it. Anyway, just do it. Jon Foster-Pedley has indeed done that. He's flown planes, low flying just above giraffes, and then done the MBA, but now the Dean of Henley Business School in Africa. Great chatting to you, and thanks for allowing us to put you in the spotlight.
Thanks very much, Ashraf. And thanks for the questions. They were great.
It's a pleasure. Lots more we'll talk about, and we do this every afternoon, of course, putting somebody in the spotlight. Right now, time for Radio VUCA.